Hello everybody, welcome back to our fourth and final video on questions of gender. In our last couple of videos we were thinking about first, second and third wave feminists. I want to share the ideas of two thinkers with you in this video. The first is very definitely a third wave feminist and actually quite characteristic of third wave feminists. The other much less so. Both thinkers though have ideas which are utterly fascinating and I hope you'll find them inspirational as well. Let's jump straight into the first. I want to talk about a film, a movie made with the title Misrepresentation. Here is two words, but of course it's a lovely play on words, isn't it? It's a documentary film directed by a US filmmaker, Jennifer Newsom. The film examines women's representation and misrepresentation in the media. Newsom noted that the film was designed as a social action campaign, with viewers encouraged to respond to the ideas and protest and campaign using various media. As such, of course, the film has its own website, a project website, the Representation Project website. Here's a quote from it, describes neatly the premise of the film. The media is selling the idea that girls' and women's value lies in their youth, in their beauty and sexuality, and not in their capacity as leaders. Boys learn that their success is tied to dominance, power and aggression. We must value people as whole human beings, not as gendered stereotypes. So hold on to those ideas. That's what we're going to be investigating in a minute. And there's some great material out there on the internet, of course. There's a couple of trailers for the film. I've actually got the film on DVD. If you're watching this in Germany, it's worth noting, I couldn't find it on the Region 2 DVD. I had to import mine from the States. But maybe you'll find it somewhere on Netflix or something similar like that. We're simply going to watch the trailer though in this course together, and there's two trailers. We're going to watch the longer one, which is 8 minutes long. Gives you a feeling for the feel of the film. I compared the trailer to the film, and the editing style and the premises, the things that are investigated in both, they really are quite comparable. So watch the longer 8-minute trailer. Talk about it, of course, with your partner. Note down interesting comments that you hear in the trailer. Discuss the comments that you like the best. I found many people in the film said really thought-provoking things. So quickly jot down any thought-provoking comments which you wish to hold on to. How do you find the trailer at the end of your discussion? And also, think about the following question. In what way is Jennifer Newsom's work typical of third wave feminism? Does this project correspond to how Naomi Wolf was describing third wave feminism in our last video? Think about that question too. Pause here and unpause here. I won't talk about the comments that I found inspiring. There were quite simply too many. If I were giving this lesson in a classroom, we could talk about the film for something like half an hour. Many people are quite richly inspired by many of the comments that we hear. In what way is Newsom's work typical of her generation of feminists? Note how Naomi Wolf was celebrating how third wave feminists are quite plural. There's a lot of diversity in that scene. You know, they don't have to be dogmatic. They have a space to be less dogmatic. She also noted, whereas previously feminists were a little bit suspicious of the media, third wave feminists are actually quite good at using the media. And I think this video clip is a great example of that. In terms of the editing style, it's of course copying the style we're used to from, say, Hollywood blockbusters on TV. You know, it's brutal, it's loud, it's in your face. It's almost as if the filmmaker is herself fighting fire with fire here. That's the feeling I had watching it. And of course, the things that people say in that clip, there's really a food for thought there. I watched that clip for the first time on YouTube and something lovely happened. After that, YouTube was recommending other interesting videos for me to watch, typically interviews of the people interviewed in the clip. So I was surfing for hours after stumbling across that. Let's move on though. I want to talk about one final person today. I've saved one of the most interesting for last here. I'd like to say a few words about Judith Butler and gently steer you towards her ideas. I would note very straight away that the person we're talking about here is a philosopher. She's currently working in the areas of gender studies and cultural studies. She's based in a US university. she really kicked off a lot of interest with her book, Gender Trouble. Isn't that a great book title? And that introduced her idea of gender performativity, which we're going to talk about in a minute. Also, a lovely expression she used, doing gender. It's worth noting Butler speaks German. She lectures in Germany from time to time. I think she spent a year in Heidelberg as a student years ago. And this is lovely. Germans are always charmed when somebody speaks their language. And I think because of this, Butler is very often cited in Germany. Even in my social work circles, a lot of people would use her ideas quite freely. They fit neatly as well with that whole cultural studies tradition, you know, Foucault and all the rest. So if you're a social work student or sociology student in Germany, her ideas are well worth grappling with. Good. We're going to watch in a moment a clip where Judith herself explains her ideas. She does it beautifully, simply, step by step. The title of the video, Big Thinking, Big Ideas, is quite a trick to actually try and simplify the complexity of her arguments. We're talking about the ideas of a philosopher here, of course. The starting point, the introduction that she gives in her clip, is a very, very simple one. She says, firstly, let's think about gender as being performed. So gender is performed, she notes. We take on gender roles, we are acting in some way. And this point, of course, is not new. This takes us back to our socialization idea that we understood well going back to the last century. So the starting point is not new in any way. She says the gender that we act, we're acting a gender, is crucial to the gender that we present to the world. So we act a gender a little bit like we may act the role of the worker or the parent or the school child or whatever. But then she makes a contrast. She says, I'm going to say something else. Gender is performative. So rather than being just performing, it's performative. And this is where it becomes interesting. She says, for something to be performative means that it produces a series of effects. She explains this. We act and walk and speak and talk in ways that consolidate an impression being a man or being a woman. We act as if that being a man or being a woman is actually an internal reality, something that's true about us, a fact about us, if you like. But actually, it's a phenomenon that's being produced and reproduced all the time. And then she steps back from this and she grins and she says, nobody is a gender from the start. So we've got an idea which is really quite fascinating, and you have to kind of get your head around this. In Gender Trouble, Butler says something interesting about performativity. Although we're impersonating, we're imitating, we're copying an ideal of gender, this ideal never existed. We act, we do a gender every day, which never had an original version. In other words, we're imitating an imitation of an imitation of an imitation of an imitation. You know, we're copying a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy. And it goes on forever. The act that one does, Butler notes, the act that one performs is, in a sense, an act that's been going on before one arrived on the scene. Gender is a kind of drag, it's a kind of cross-dressing. It's imitative doing. I'm wearing my gender, if you like. To some extent, we have freedom. Now, in sociology, when we talk about freedom, we often use the term agency. Agency. In sociological parlance, agency. We have freedom, we have agency in our gender performativity. Doing gender can be creative. Sometimes, in Butler's words, subversive. And you'll find beautiful examples of this in popular culture. You know, in popular culture, I can, for example, walk in wearing a skirt rather than my blue jeans. You know, that's what a musician would do, for example. So sometimes we have possibilities to be creative, to be subversive. However, we do not have a carte blanche in doing gender. You know, we don't have free hand here. Although we may want to be creative, there are regulative forces that restrict us, that prevent us in our freedom. Butler talks about freedom and she talks about norm policing. Alongside institutional powers, you know, you've got marriage, you've got psychiatry, you've got the church. These institutions try to steer us to behave in certain ways. They try to restrict our agency. So we've got these powers limiting us. We've also got informal practices, bullying, for example. Bullying keep us in our gender place, acts of violence keeping us in our gender place. In Gender Trouble, Butler uses a fascinating concept. She's talking about the heterosexual matrix. It's really interesting, well worth investigating. So to summarize, she's interested in how gender norms get established, how they get policed, regulated in other words, and also how it's best to disrupt these norms, overcome the policing. She's an optimistic thinking. She's celebrating human freedom here whilst being mindful of the regulation of that freedom. So there you are. Have a good think about this. Watch the clip. You can watch it a couple of times. The clip's enjoyable. Butler herself is very enjoyable when she talks. So, sit back and enjoy that. Watch it a few times to soak up her ideas, get your head around them. Of course, my closing question, how do you find Butler's ideas on doing gender? Can you relate to these ideas? Can you relate to her perspective on gender? There you are. Some food for thought to finish this last video. And it goes without saying, if you're interested in Judith Butler, there's a whole bunch of material out there on the internet. You'll find videos. There's an Arte documentary a few years back, which you'll find in German. There's also, I think, an English language version on French Arte. There's also her book, Gender Trouble, well worth dipping into. You might even stumble across it as a PDF on the internet. I'm going to come to a close here. Have fun investigating all these gender ideas on your own. Thank you.